Hi, my name is Sandy Simpson, and today we're going to talk about the attack of the enemy on the churches. So much heresy is entering the churches these days. And as you would suspect, sometimes it's due to a pastor attending a conference or reading a book and becoming diapraxed with unbiblical ideas. He then starts to weave those ideas into his messages and begins to invite speakers to the church to expound on those ideas. Then, when confronted by someone in the church who has reservations about the new stuff being taught, they're told not to talk about it and just go along with the program. If that person does not, they are often ostracized or slandered behind their backs. And often they're also told to leave, which is probably what they should do in any case. But my observation is that it's not only the pastor who causes unbiblical changes to influence the church. Often the pastor is blissfully unaware of influences coming into his church. They often come in through, number one, the worship team, 2, women's groups, 3, the bookstore, 4, children's programs, and 5, interdenominational prayer efforts, and finally, relief and mission organizations. If unchecked, this type of infiltration is much more subtle and can become deeply rooted. Well, let's look at these areas of infiltration into the churches. First one is the worship team. As I dealt with in my 2 articles, Worship Songs Ratings Page and DVD on the subject of testing music in the church, which you can see the URLs on the screen now, one of the gates through which a lot of heresy is introduced into the church is through music, unfortunately. Now, here's a quote from my article, Testing Music in the Church. The problems. Too many churches today are allowing music to be used in their service that's not glorifying to the Lord and can actually be a hindrance to teaching sound doctrine. Pastors and leaders should be using their leadership role to test what's being played and sung in their churches. Though some are quick to test preaching and teaching from their pulpit, many ignore the music being used in the same services. You know what? This is a tragic mistake. Music is a powerful medium. It's something that affects deeply the body, mind, and emotions. It's a proven fact that music often stays with a person far longer than what's taught or preached. Songs roam around in our heads, especially if the melody appeals to us. What's often overlooked is the serious impression music makes on people and the teaching they're getting over and over again as they allow the song to repeat in their minds and on their lips. Music teaches things much more subtly, yet sometimes far more effectively than simply teaching or preaching. Well, what's the solution? Well, that's why the lyrical content of music in the church, as well as its effect on the spiritual lives of those who perform and listen, should be vigorously examined by the leaders of the church. Now, I'm not suggesting that it should be done in a legalistic way. Church leaders don't want to discourage youth, for example, from singing in the church or writing music. But discernment in the area of music must be done nonetheless. Shepherds have an obligation from the Lord to protect his flock. It should be established by the church leaders that any music done in the church will be held up to the same scrutiny as any other teaching or materials used in the church. Now, if you do not allow just any book, any Sunday school material, any magazine to be on display in your church, then why would you allow music that has unsound doctrine and might cause people to sin? Let's talk about style versus substance for a minute. Now, please understand that I'm not one who puts down any particular instrument, style, or form of music. Instruments are neither good nor evil in themselves. It's rather the motive and intent in using musical instruments that gives the interpretation or spirit, if you will, to the music and lyrics. It's the musician that gives the instruments and vocals the words and music that create any particular mood, message, or atmosphere. Musical instruments have been around since before the flood, Genesis 4:21. All musical instruments can be used to glorify the Lord or glorify something else. I do not agree with the current teaching in some circles that drums, for instance, and percussion instruments were not used in biblical times for worship. Therefore, we should not use them now, today. You know, those who teach these things are frankly ignorant of Scripture. For instance, the timbrel or toff was a percussion instrument with a membrane. The drums varied in size and were played with either bare hands or with sticks. Well, the timbrel or tambourine can be found being used for worship in the following passages. And take a look at those. Genesis 31:27, Exodus 15:20, Job 21:12, Psalm 81:2, and 149:3 and 154. You know, actually many noisy instruments such as cymbals and horns were used in worship. And look at those references. So apparently it's not the noise level, but the motive and intent of the people playing the instruments that count. Let's think about motive and intent. The motivation behind the use of music and lyrics are what Christian leaders should be looking at seriously today. Now, it may surprise you, but lyrically, I know of old hymns, for instance, that have bad theology. I also know of hard rock music that pictures very effectively scenes like the death of Jesus Christ and are doctrinally sound. So it's not always the style of music that is necessarily the problem. The problem comes in the way it's presented and the lyrical content. Sometimes you end up with fleshly worship music. I'm sad to say that much of the modern worship and praise, quote-unquote, music tends to appeal to the flesh. Much of it has lost its focus on Christ, tends to be humanistic, and has little or no beneficial lyrical content. Modern worship, quote-unquote, music today is often way too repetitive, and in fact tends to send a person into a trance-like state. You know what? We're called to worship God with our whole mind, body, and spirit. 1 Corinthians 14 through 15. Trance induction is an occult technique, not a biblical one. The lyrics to much of the music used today in the churches is shallow theologically, and some teach downright false doctrines. Much of it also tends to be so simplistic that it no longer contains even the basics of good musicality. Thankfully, there's also good modern music out there to be found if churches make the effort to obtain it. And that's important. Now, please also check out the YouTube video that I did with Tim Worth for more information, and here's the URL. Well, there's another way that false teaching enters the churches, and that's through women's groups, unfortunately. I've noticed in many otherwise biblically solid churches the tendency for women's groups to be using unbiblical materials. Sometimes it's due to a woman coming in from an unbiblical church and using the women's group as a way to bring unbiblical doctrines into the church, making an end run around the pastor and elders. Beware of that. Sometimes one or more of the women in these groups has been watching Christian quote-unquote TV and wants to bring in a study series from one of their favorites. I often see materials and books being used, authored by false teachers like Joyce Meyer, Juanita Bynum, Marilyn Hickey, Paula White, Joy Dawson, Cindy Jacobs, Patricia King, Ruth Heflin, Gwen Shaw, Beth Moore, and many others. The names that I actually have hyperlinks for, you can get more information on their unbiblical teachings. All of those people I mentioned are false teachers. The ones in bold are women who actually produce a lot of materials that are most often used in some women's groups. My advice is for good pastors to become more involved in checking out materials of any kind being used in their churches, and not be afraid to ask the leadership of the women's groups not to use certain women's materials. You know, I've seen way too many women's groups branch off into studying books rather than the Bible. You know, there are many Bible study courses that are excellent that could be used. And I have a number of those on my site under the Bible Studies page. Check those out. Now, another gate into churches is bookstores. I've spent a lot of time trying to inform Christian bookstores of their heretical books on their shelves. In a few cases, those efforts were met with success, but more often, since the motive for selling books seems to be more financial than spiritual, unfortunately, those efforts are met with disdain or rejection. I challenged one Christian bookstore to take Benny Hinn books off their shelves by handing them a paper with a number of unrepentant false prophecies he had made. Well, they politely thanked me, but when I came in a few weeks later, they had simply turned the books spine out rather than face out, reducing the physical bookshelf space for the books, but not getting rid of any of his books. The motive was financial, as many people were buying them. That's why they were selling them. Now, you'd be shocked to see what many major Christian bookstores sell in their stores. The question occurs to me that they are not really Christian at all, as they'll stock any book people want to buy, just like a secular bookstore would. I did a DVD and article on this subject that actually shocks a lot of people, and here are the URLs for that article. Books along with music are usually the initial way that the enemy is able to attack the belief systems of people who call themselves Christians. I've had many people hand me books that turned out to be heretical. You need to carefully check any books people give you. You can find many of them reviewed on my site under the page Book Reviews. For our recommended reading list, go here for issues of deception in the church, and here for other book recommendations. We have a lot. Check it out. I also challenged another church bookstore on selling the, you might remember the book Prayer of Jabez. And they initially got angry with me. But about a month afterwards, I handed them Gary Gilley's book called I Just Wanted More Land, Jabez. And a month later, the book was pulled from their shelves. It disappeared. Of course, I never got any thanks for alerting them. More often, I am met with anger and told it's none of my business. There are some Christian bookstores out there that sell anywhere from 60 to 80% heretical books these days. Be very much aware. Check out my Bookstores DVD for information on which ones to avoid. Unfortunately, another way into the churches is through children's programs. Unfortunately, a number of children's programs have been infiltrated by the New Apostolic Reformation as well as the emerging church. Sad to say, for instance, one of them is Awana, a great program from the past. Be careful. Check out the materials. Take out the bad stuff. Now, here's a list of organizations now supporting the spiritual formation platform of Richard Foster and emergent church leadership. Alpha Course, Bible.org, Focus on the Family, Awana Clubs, Tyndale Seminary, CMA, Christian Management Association, InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, Reformed Church of America, Biola University, Bethel Seminary, Salvation Army, Dallas Theological Seminary, believe it or not, Baptist State Convention of North Carolina, Dallas Willard, Renovar, Redeemer Presbyterian of New York, Saddleback Church, and Purpose Driven, Vanguard Church, Presbyterian Church USA, Upper Room Ministries, Zondervan Publishers, Simpson University in Reading, Kairos School of Spiritual Formation, InterVarsity Press, Willow Creek, Youth Specialties, Abilene Christian University, Mennonite USA, George Fox University, Trevecca Nazarene University, Nazarene Theological Seminary, and many more. Check out the list on Lighthouse Trails. What a church can do with Awana is go through the materials and take out the teachings on contemplative spirituality. You can still use the program as the older vision is still there, but be careful that you don't start influencing your young kids away from sound doctrine. Be very careful these days. Another way in is through prayer meetings, international prayer efforts in particular. Be very careful of getting your church or allowing members of your church to become involved in cross-denominational prayer meetings. It used to be fine, not now. These days, these kinds of prayer initiatives are often backed by the New Apostolic Reformation, who actually has taken over the National Prayer Day through its World Prayer Center. Often big prayer meetings are backed by the NAR and their transformations agenda, a dominionist pipe dream. The Transformations video series was passed around to many churches, but was full of inaccuracies and outright fabrications. Now, we did an article on that when the first Transformations video came out, and it's here. Groups like Youth with a Mission often use the technique of starting prayer and fasting meetings in churches, getting people to view them as ultra-holy. Then when they have enough people, they begin to take over, bringing in all the garbage they're taught in their University of the Nations, DTS, etc. And that includes all the teachings of the emerging church, New Apostolic, and many other heretical sources. Also, be careful of some relief and mission organizations. There are many agencies, organizations, and missions that are under the leadership of the New Apostolic Reformation and false apostles C. Peter Wagner and Chuck Pierce. The list of people involved in the New Apostolic Reformation is far too long to list, but there are key players, and I want you to know who they are. Some of these people are listed as apostles, some prophets, some pastors, some claim to hold all the offices or some new hybrid designation. Of course, the list has to start with Apostle C. Peter Wagner of Wagner Leadership Institute, who called himself a super apostle. But there are dozens of other organizations that he is the apostle of, such as Global Harvest Ministries, Mission America, Lighthouse Movement, International Coalition of Apostles, Wagner Publications, and the National Prayer Committee. Some of the key people featured on the video clips that we show in our NAR DVD series are involved in the C. Peter Wagner's New Apostolic Reformation and his International Coalition of Apostles, and who have taught at the Wagner Leadership Institute. And those people are as follows: Apostle and Overseer John Eckhart of Impact Network, Crusaders Ministries in Chicago, Illinois, Apostle Chuck Pierce of Glory of Zion Ministries International and Global Harvest Ministries. He's actually the head of the New Apostolic now. Apostle, Prophet, and Bishop Bill Hammond of Christian International Ministries Network. Apostle Jim LaFoon of the International Apostolic Team of Morning Star International. Prophetess Cindy Jacobs of Generals of Intercession and Women's Aglow Fellowship. Senior Pastor Ted Haggard of New Life Church, Colorado Springs. He's not there anymore. Got kicked out, and that's where the Wagners actually attended at the time, and where many of the ministries of the NAR were also located, and also Global Harvest Ministries. Prophet Mike Bickle, formerly of the Kansas City Prophets and now of Friends of the Bridegroom and International House of Prayer. Prophetess Mary Crum of Life Center Ministries and Christian International Ministries Network. Senior Pastor Jack Deere of Evangelical Foundation Ministries and Trinity Fellowship Church of Amarillo, Texas. Prophetess and Senior Pastor Barbara Yoder of Shekinah Christian Church of Ann Arbor, Michigan. Apostles and Senior Pastor Dutch Sheets of Spring Harvest Fellowship of Colorado Springs, Colorado. Fuller Seminary and Dutch Sheets Ministries. Now, some other prominent names from the Wagner Leadership Institute and the International Coalition of Apostles are as follows: Intercessor Alice Smith of U.S. Prayer Center, America's National Prayer Committee, International Reconciliation Coalition, and International Spiritual Warfare Network. Intercessor Doris Wagner, wife of C. Peter Wagner, co-founder of Global Harvest Ministries. Apostle George Otis Jr. of the Sentinel Group, producer of the Transformations video series. Pastor Bob Beckett of the Dwelling Place Family Church, Professor Charles Kraft of Fuller Seminary and Deep Healing Ministries, Senior Pastor David Canistrasi of Evangel Christian Fellowship, Mr. Eddie Smith, founder of the U.S. Prayer Center, America's National Prayer Committee and U.S. Lausanne Committee, Mission America and International Spiritual Warfare Network, the World Prayer Advisory Council, and the International Reconciliation Coalition. Teacher Ed Silvoso, founder of Harvest Evangelism Incorporated and the Lighthouse Movement. Apostle Dr. Belcher, member of the CFNI Executive Management Committee, director of the Institute Emeritus, president of the CFN Alumni Ministers Fellowship, instructor for the School of Pastoral Ministry, senior pastor Ernest Gentile, founding pastor of Christian Community Church in San Jose, California, intercessor Frank Hammond of Children's Bread, Mr. George Barna of Barna Research Group Limited, pastor and intercessor Jill Griffith of Wagner Productions, writer Jim Rutz of Open Church Ministries, and a freelance writer for groups such as World Vision, Wycliffe, Youth for Christ, Prison Fellowship, and the Lausanne Committee, Jews for Jesus, and InterVarsity. Writer Ken Geyer of Wagner Publications. Apostle and Senior Pastor Lawrence Kong of Faith Community Baptist Church in Singapore. Pastor Linda Rios Brook of Lakeland Foundation Incorporated and Linda Rios Brook Ministries. Teacher Laura Allison, founder and president of Celebration Ministries. Senior Pastor Naomi Dowdy, founder and president of Global Leadership Network and the Theological Center for Asia in Singapore. Author Quinn Shearer, author of Pray for Your Children and Good Night, Lord. Apostle Rich Marshall, founding pastor of Springs of Life Fellowship, Sunnyvale, California. Senior Pastor Robert Heidler of Glory of Zion Outreach Center, Shekinah Messianic Ministries, Pray for Peace of Jerusalem, and the Glory of Zion International Ministries. Senior Pastor Stephen Mansfield of Belmont Church in Nashville, Tennessee. Pastor Terry Takel of Aldersgate United Methodist, Houston, Texas. Author Rebecca Wagner, Sistema, associate publisher for Wagner Publications. Pastor David DeBoard, executive director of the Christian Pastoral Counseling Center of Pasadena and of Deep Healing Ministries. Pastor and author Barbara Wentrobel of Wagner Publications. Senior Pastor Che An of Harvest Rock Church in Pasadena, California, and the founder and president of Harvest International Ministries. Author Stan DeKoven of Wagner Publications and over 20 books and numerous study guides. Author Hector Torres, founder and president of Hispanic International Ministries and coordinator to the Hispanic World for the World Prayer Center based in Colorado Springs. Senior Pastor Michael Fletcher of Manna Church in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and founder of ARC Ministries assisting Romanian churches. Senior Pastor Larry Jackson of Bethel Outreach International Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. At the last report from Apostolic Council of Prophetic Elders with focus on Cuba of January 10, 2002, written by Chuck Pierce, those apostles attending were Wesley and Stacy Campbell, Jim Gall, Bill and Evelyn Hammond, Mike and Cindy Jacobs, Jim LaFoon, Bart Pierce, Chuck D. Pierce, Rick Ridings, John and Paula Sanford, Michael and Andrea Schiffman, Gwen Shaw, Dutch Sheets, Sharon Stone, Tommy Tenney, Hector Torres, Peter and Doris Wagner, and Barbara Wentrobel. Now here is also a partial list of supporting organizations of New Apostolic Reformation programs and those who teach NAR materials. Other organizations that directly support the New Apostolic Reformation and its goals are Impact Network, Crusaders Ministries, Glory of Zion Ministries International, Christian International Ministries Network, International Apostolic Team of Morning Star International, Generals of Intercession, Women's Aglow Fellowship, U.S. Prayer Center, America's National Prayer Committee, International Reconciliation Coalition, International Spiritual Warfare Network, the Sentinel Group, Deep Healing Ministries, World Prayer Advisory Council, Harvest Evangelism Incorporated, Children's Bread, Barna Research Group Limited, Open Church Ministries, World Vision, and of special note is Youth with a Mission, YWAM. C. Peter Wagner served as on the YWAM prayer boards, and YWAM Publishing publishes C. Peter Wagner and George Otis books and sells books by many of the other New Apostolic Reformation leadership. Continuing with the list, Youth for Christ, Prison Fellowship, InterVarsity, Lakeland Foundation Incorporated, Celebration Ministries, Global Leadership, Glory of Zion Outreach Center, Shekinah Messianic Ministries, Pray for the Peace of Jerusalem, the Christian Pastoral Counseling Center of Pasadena, Harvest International Ministries, Hispanic International, Cell Church, Benny Hinn Ministries, Renovar, many charismatic Catholic organizations, Promise Keepers, March for Jesus. Now, the source for this information is the Wagner Leadership Institute and the International Coalition of Apostles websites. It's clear that some of the alleged 8,000 churches and organizations and 1 million lighthouses who signed on in support of the Lighthouse movement of C. Peter Wagner were possibly unaware that they are now included in Mission America, which is also his organization. Now, I'm sure some organizations and churches still don't know that they've signed on to the NAR agenda, but after you read the list of Mission America signatories on their website, you'll understand the scope of the Wagner Global Church Movement. It's incredible. Now, I can't list them all here, as it would take up so many pages in a book or elsewhere that I can't do it. Now, you can find this information on Lighthouse Movement website or in our video series, The New Apostolic Reformation. So as you can see, there are a wide variety of organizations involved and many more who signed on with Wagner and his Lighthouse and Mission America organizations. You have to be really careful these days who you get involved with, because they may or may not be your brother in the Lord. You know what? The Bible says something. It says we need to test everything, hold on to the good. And I encourage you to do that in your church. Be careful, because the apostasy is here.